Most people remember Roy Rogers as the smiling cowboy king who dominated Hollywood for decades. But behind that cheerful facade was a man who buried more loved ones than most people could survive. The tragedies that haunted his life would break anyone else, yet somehow he kept riding. What really happened to the man America trusted most? Rogers wasn't born into glamour or wealth. His real name was Leonard Franklin Sly, and in 1912, his father and uncle got so desperate to escape city poverty that they built a houseboat out of literal garbage, salvaged wood nobody else wanted. They loaded up the entire family and floated down the Ohio River hoping for something better. Instead, the Great Flood of 1913 destroyed everything they owned. The family that would eventually produce Hollywood royalty started with absolutely nothing, watching their makeshift home wash away in muddy water. By 1919, they'd settled on a hard-scrabble farm near Lucasville, Ohio, where young Leonard learned to ride horses and developed a skill that sounds insane today: yodeling across acres of farmland, because they couldn't afford anything resembling communication technology. This wasn't entertainment, it was survival. But here's where things get interesting. Leonard's father worked brutal factory shifts, then came home on weekends with small gifts for his kids. One gift changed everything: a horse. On that animal, the future king of cowboys learned to ride. Meanwhile, he practiced yodeling by playing a cylinder recording of Swiss yodelers on repeat until his family created their own style. Saturday nights, they hosted square dances where teenage Leonard sang, played mandolin, and called dances. Then the Great Depression hit and childhood ended instantly. He dropped out of school and joined his father at the Portsmouth shoe factory, a 19-year-old kid trying to keep his family fed. Nobody watching him stitch shoes together could have predicted what came next. California called, and by 1930, Leonard's entire family had relocated west, renting a cramped house while working road construction. His sister Mary saw something in her shy brother that he didn't see in himself. She literally crafted him a Western shirt by hand and shoved him toward a radio audition for a show called Midnight Frolic. Leonard was terrified. He'd only performed for family in tiny farm settings, but Mary wouldn't let him quit. Days after that first radio performance, a country music group called the Rocky Mountaineers heard him and made an offer: join us and actually make money from music. He said yes, then did something weird. He placed a newspaper ad reading "Yodeler for old-time act to travel, tenor preferred." The guy who answered became a legend named Bob Nolan. Together, they changed country music forever, but first Leonard had to keep bouncing between failing bands like the International Cowboys and the Oboro Cowboys, searching for something that stuck. Then, during one random radio gig in Roswell, New Mexico, everything shifted. A woman named Grace Wilkins called the radio station with a bizarre proposition: if Leonard sang her favorite song, the Swiss Yodel, she'd bake him a pie. He sang it, she baked it. They fell hard for each other, and by June 1936, they were married in Roswell. Grace seemed like Leonard's reward for years of struggle. A happy marriage, real stability. They adopted their first child, then had a daughter named Linda Lou. In 1946, they had a son, Roy Jr., nicknamed Dusty. But just days after giving birth, Grace died from complications. Leonard became a widower with young children, his heart shattered, just as his career was about to explode beyond imagination. The timing was cruel, and what happened next would haunt him forever. The studio renamed him on the spot. Rogers came from recently deceased Western storyteller Will Rogers, banking on positive associations. Roy came from the French word for king. Leonard Franklin Sly, the farm boy who yodeled across cornfields, became Roy Rogers, king of the Cowboys. In Under Western Stars, he rode a horse named Golden Cloud. But the connection between man and animal was so obvious that Rogers bought him for $2,500 and renamed him Trigger. From that moment forward, they were inseparable. Trigger became known as the smartest horse in movies, and studios often gave Trigger second billing above Rogers' second wife, Dale Evans. The horse was literally more famous than some human co-stars. Rogers topped the Motion Picture Herald's poll of top money-making Western stars from 1943 to 1954, appearing for 16 consecutive years. Gene Autry never recovered from losing that role.
But Rogers did something most actors never thought to do. He outsmarted Hollywood lawyers. When his original contract came up for renegotiation, Rogers inserted a clause retaining rights to his likeness, voice, and name for merchandising. Then he absolutely flooded the market. Roy Rogers action figures, play sets, novels, comic books, he sold everything. Only Walt Disney moved more merchandise than Rogers at his peak. The cowboy from Cincinnati, who once stitched shoes in a Depression-era factory, now rivaled the biggest entertainment mogul in history. But his personal life was about to get complicated again. In 1944, while still married to Grace, he met actress Dale Evans on the set of Cowboy and the Senorita. When Grace died in 1946, Rogers eventually fell for Evans. In 1947, at a rodeo in Chicago Stadium, Rogers proposed to Evans while riding Trigger in front of a stunned crowd. Between 1944 and 1951, they appeared in nearly 30 films together. When his Republic Pictures contract expired in 1951, Rogers shocked everyone by walking away from movies. 1 month later, The Roy Rogers Show premiered on television, running for 100 episodes between 1951 and 1957. But behind the scenes, darkness kept creeping back in. Rogers and Evans had one biological child together and adopted 4 more. One adopted daughter, Robin Elizabeth, had Down syndrome. Before her 2nd birthday, she contracted mumps and died from complications. The loss devastated them both. Even decades later, Evans was still processing the grief, writing a book called Angel Unaware about Robin's short life. They had other adopted children to focus on: Mimi, Dodie, Debbie, and a boy named Sandy. In 1955, Rogers bought a 300-acre ranch near Chatsworth, California, a sprawling property with a hilltop ranch house straight out of his films. Finally, it seemed like he'd found peace. Then, in 1964, his adopted daughter Debbie went on a church outing. The bus crashed. She died. Another child gone. Rogers now had only his Christian faith to lean on, having joined the Hollywood Christian group with Evans back in 1949. His religious values carried him through losses that would destroy most people. And when the Republican National Convention approached him for running for Congress, his response revealed everything about his character. "I have both Democrat and Republican fans, and I can't afford to lose any of them." He refused to divide his audience for political gain, a stance that seems almost impossible to imagine today. Rogers never forgot where he came from either. His old band, Sons of the Pioneers, continued making music after he left. Even as the biggest star in Western entertainment, Rogers frequently hired them as backup in his films and television shows. He kept performing with them until the very end. In 1998, at age 86, Roy Rogers died from congestive heart failure. Dale Evans and his surviving children buried him at Sunset Hills Memorial Park in Apple Valley, California. But his real resting place was among the stars, literally. Most actors pray for 1 star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Rogers has 3, cementing his status as the undisputed king of the Cowboys. What most people don't realize is how Rogers maintained that wholesome image while Hollywood around him spiraled into scandal after scandal. While other stars were getting exposed for affairs, substance issues, and backstage drama, Rogers kept his reputation spotless. Some insiders whispered it was too perfect, that nobody could be that clean in an industry that dirty. But Rogers proved them wrong by simply living his values, even when cameras weren't rolling. He treated crew members the same respect he showed directors. He answered fan mail personally. He showed up on time, knew his lines, and never complained about working conditions that would make modern actors walk off set. That dedication came from those Depression-era years stitching shoes. He never forgot what real hardship felt like, and he never took his success for granted. The man who yodeled across farmland to communicate with his family became one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces. The kid who dropped out of school to stitch shoes in a factory outsmarted studio executives and built a merchandising empire. The shy performer who needed his sister to push him on stage dominated entertainment for decades. But none of that success could protect him from watching his children die, one after another. Rogers carried grief most people couldn't survive, yet he kept writing, kept smiling, kept entertaining. That's the real story behind The Crown. Not the legend Hollywood sold, but the man who endured unimaginable pain and somehow never let it break him completely. His 3 stars on the Walk of Fame don't just honor an entertainer. They mark the legacy of someone who showed an entire generation what resilience actually looks like when everything falls apart.